The stories. This hospital wing is a secret trap. Larkin Pruitt learned that phrase from a guard who would not step past the double doors, not even for overtime pay. The wing sat dark on the fourth floor, and people swore it was built to catch the wrong person. He was 34 years old and worked as a biomedical equipment tech at a regional hospital near a river town. That morning, he just wanted to swap old heart monitors, label cables, and go home before his shift ran long. The renovation schedule said the wing was closed, which meant no patients and fewer interruptions for once. The charge nurse handed him a clipboard and pointed at the service elevator with a tired look. "Fourth floor, east wing, and do not get cute with those doors," she said, keeping her voice low. Larkin asked what she meant, and she shook her head like she hated the story. "They lock weird, and that place eats radios," she said, then walked away before he could ask more. Security met him at the elevator with a plastic bin of temporary badges and 2 flashlights. The guard was named Terrence Hale, late 50s, and he moved like his knees hurt every step. Terrence scanned Larkin in, then stopped at the threshold and did not cross it. "If you hear the overhead chime, you walk back out," Terrence said, watching the ceiling instead of Larkin. Larkin tried to laugh, but it came out flat and unsure. He said he was not hunting ghosts, he was swapping monitors and checking batteries. Terrence nodded like he had heard that line too many times before. "Sure," Terrence said, then pointed to the stairwell door behind them. "That is your exit. Remember it." The east wing smelled like old disinfectant and dusty drywall, with a colder air that felt deliberate. Work lights hung from cords, but only 2 of them worked, and they threw long shadows. The hallway signs still named departments that no longer existed, like respiratory overflow and recovery annex. Larkin kept moving, because standing still made the quiet feel heavier than it should. He reached the supply alcove, where the monitors were stacked in a neat row, ready for removal. Each unit had a tag with a date, and the oldest one read 1997 in faded ink. He took out his phone to snap photos for his work log, then noticed his signal was gone. That fit what Terrence said, and it still made Larkin uneasy in a way he could not name. He started on the first monitor and kept his tools close, because he did not like the echo. Metal clicks bounced down the hall, then came back softer, like someone else was repeating them. He told himself it was just the building, just the empty rooms and the tile floors. Then the overhead speaker crackled, and a single tone chirped like a call bell clearing its throat. The sound lasted 2 seconds, then the speaker went quiet again. Larkin froze with a screwdriver in his hand, listening hard for anything that followed. Nothing happened, so he exhaled and forced himself to keep working. That was when the double doors behind him swung inward and shut with a heavy final thud. He turned and walked back fast, because he did not like the timing at all. The doors had no handle on his side, just a smooth plate and a narrow seam. He pushed anyway and felt the panel give a little, then lock solid like it hit a deadbolt. He called out Terrence's name, but his voice died in the hallway like the air swallowed it. Larkin stepped back and tried the crash bar on the nearby stairwell door. The bar did not move, and the red alarm light above it did not blink. He pulled his badge and waved it at the reader, and the reader stayed dark. That was the moment the phrase made sense, and his stomach tightened with a cold rush. He walked to the closest nurse station and found an old desk with a dead computer monitor. A dusty phone sat on the counter, and its receiver cord was cut cleanly. On the wall behind it, a laminated map showed routes marked with arrows and thick lines. Someone had written in pen across the bottom, "Do not use east exit during isolation." Larkin had heard stories about isolation wings during outbreaks, but this felt older than that. He followed the map, moving slow and checking each intersection for an open stairwell. Every door he tried was locked, and the badge readers were either blank or missing. The only thing that worked was the overhead speaker, which clicked again and gave one more chirp. He stopped near room 418 because the door was cracked open a few inches. Inside was a stripped patient room with an empty bed frame and a cracked plastic chair. The window blinds were half down, and the light from outside made the room look underwater. On the floor near the wall, a thin line of dust was disturbed, like something had been dragged recently. Larkin crouched and looked closer, and he saw scuff marks leading to the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed, but the handle was intact and it opened with a soft squeal. There was nothing inside except an old vent grate and a faint smell of damp drywall. Then he noticed the grate screws were new, shiny against the rust around them. He could have ignored it, but his instincts would not let him. He grabbed the grate and pulled, and it popped free like someone wanted it removed fast. Behind it was a narrow space, not a normal duct, more like a hidden passage between walls. A second vent cover sat a few feet in, and beyond that, he saw a faint glow. Larkin took out his flashlight and aimed it into the gap, then heard a low whir of a fan. The glow came from a small work light set on the floor, and it was still warm. Someone had been there, and not a long time ago. His skin prickled and he backed away, because he did not have any business crawling into a wall. He returned to the hallway and tried to call again, but his phone still showed no service. He turned on airplane mode and off again, then tried anyway, and it failed like before. He opened his work bag and found a small handheld tester with a recording function for troubleshooting. It was not meant for this, but it was better than nothing. So he pressed record and spoke clearly. He said his name, his job, the date, and that he was locked inside the East Wing. He described the speaker tones, the door shut, and the vent gap with a warm light inside. He did it the way he filed incident reports, calm and factual, even though his hands shook. When he finished, he clipped the tester to his belt like a tiny witness. Larkin walked back to the double doors and pounded 3 times, then waited. No footsteps came, no reply, and the air felt colder near the doors, like the building was breathing. He looked up and saw a small camera dome in the corner, its lens facing down the hall. The tiny green light on it was off, which meant it might not be recording at all. He remembered the map and the note about isolation, and he started thinking like a tech again. If this wing was built for quarantine, it could have negative pressure, sealed doors, and remote locks. That could explain the weird air and the dead signals if the walls were reinforced. It could also explain why Terrence would not cross the threshold, because nobody wanted to be locked inside. He needed a control panel, something that ran the doors and the fans. He followed the hall until he found a metal door marked with faded letters, "Facilities only." It was locked, but the hinge side had a gap where the frame did not meet right. He slid his flashlight beam along it and saw the corner of a keypad inside. He tried the door again and felt it flex, like the latch was old and tired. He took a flat tool from his kit and worked it into the gap carefully, pushing in small increments. After a minute, the latch slipped, and the door opened with a groan that echoed too far. Inside was a cramped room full of conduit, breaker boxes, and a panel with tiny labeled switches. The panel had a sticker that read, "Isolation System, installed 1999. Below it sat a thin binder in a cracked plastic sleeve, full of maintenance notes. Larkin flipped through and saw repeated entries about door faults, speaker tests, and lock cycling. One note was underlined twice and dated 2008, and it said, "Do not enable autoseal without supervisor." He kept turning pages and found an incident entry that made him stop breathing for a second. It said a contractor got trapped after a test, and dispatch logs showed a delayed response. The note used careful language, but it ended with, "Injury reported, claim filed." Larkin had never heard about any of that, and he worked here for years. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the binder pages, then remembered there was no service. He took them anyway, because proof mattered later, even if he could not send it now. He scanned the panel and found a switch labeled Seal Enable, and it was in the on position. Next to it was a smaller switch labeled Override Release, and it was covered with a taped plastic guard. The tape looked fresh, and the guard had tiny scratches like it had been forced back recently. Larkin peeled the tape carefully and lifted the guard, then flipped the override release down. A low alarm tone sounded, not loud, but sharp, and the fans slowed like they were winding down. Down the hall, he heard the double doors clunk like bolts retracting inside the frame. He ran back to the threshold and pushed, and this time the doors moved with stiff resistance. They opened just enough for him to squeeze through, and cool normal air hit his face. He did not feel relief yet, because the hallway behind him was still dark and still wrong. He stepped out fully, and the doors shut again behind him with a softer close. Terrence was gone from the security desk, and the service elevator stood open and empty. Larkin jogged to the main corridor and finally saw a nurse, then another, then a doctor. He waved them down and tried to explain, but his voice came out too fast. A supervisor told him to sit, drink water, and wait for security, and Larkin did not argue. Within minutes, a different guard arrived, younger, and his radio worked fine in the main hall. Larkin told him everything, and he handed over the recording from the tester without hesitation. He also showed the photos on his phone, even though they were just images in a dead zone. The guard frowned and said the East Wing should be sealed only during drills, and nobody scheduled any drills. Later that afternoon, the hospital risk manager pulled Larkin into a small conference room. She was named Maris Holt, early 40s, and she spoke like someone used to bad news. She asked him to repeat the timeline, then asked if he touched anything inside the wing. Larkin said he opened a facility's door and flipped an override, because he was trapped and had no other choice. Maris stared for a long moment, then nodded slowly like she had expected that answer. She said the isolation system was supposed to be decommissioned years ago, but the project never finished. She did not explain why, and she did not have to, because her eyes gave it away. Some parts of the hospital were left behind on paper, but still alive in the walls. The next day, Larkin came back with permission to gather his tools and finish his work. This time, 2 guards went with him, and one of them carried a portable repeater for radio signal. They logged every door, every switch, and every camera dome they could find. The repeater worked until they crossed the threshold. Then the signal died again like it hit a curtain. They followed Larkin to the facilities room, and the seal enable switch was on again. Maris was not there, but a facilities supervisor was, and his face went tight when he saw it. He said nobody on his team touched that panel, and he sounded scared saying it. The younger guard took photos and called for a detective from the city, because now it was not a glitch. The detective arrived with a notebook and a calm voice, and she asked for every record they had. She requested keycard logs for the service elevator, maintenance entries, and any camera footage near the 4th floor. She used careful phrases like reportedly and consistent with, as if she knew the hospital would fight itself. Larkin watched her write, and he felt a sick pride that his recording might matter. The keycard logs showed an odd detail. One badge had accessed the service elevator at dawn that day. The badge belonged to a contract cleaner, but witness statements said the cleaner never showed up. The hospital said badges were sometimes shared, which was a problem all by itself. The detective asked who had custody of spare badges, and security went quiet. They pulled older records too, because the binder note about 2008 would not leave Larkin's mind. Dispatch logs from that year showed a call from the East Wing, then a second call, then a response delay. The narrative report used soft language about confusion and locked doors, but the pattern felt familiar. Maris admitted the injury claim existed, and she said it was settled quietly to avoid panic. Then the detective found something that connected the vent gap to the locks in a way nobody liked. A building plan from archived facilities files showed a service crawl behind room 418. It linked to a small corridor that led toward the pharmacy level, not wide enough for comfort. The plan labeled it as a contamination bypass, built so supplies could move during isolation. On paper, it made sense, but the fresh screws and warm work light meant it was being used now. They sent a small camera probe into the gap, and its final footage showed drag marks and boot prints. Near the far end, the camera caught a plastic tote wedged behind a pipe, still sealed. Inside the tote were dozens of pre-packed syringe kits, the kind tracked tightly by the pharmacy. That discovery changed the tone of the whole investigation, because now there was a motive. Someone was using the old bypass to steal controlled supplies without crossing monitored hallways. The lock trap was not superstition. It was a tool, and it kept witnesses out of the way. If a tech got stuck inside, the thief could work the bypass with less risk of being seen. The twist came when they matched the Dawn badge swipe to a second system log. The isolation panel recorded every time the seal enable switch changed position. It showed the switch was turned on 2 minutes after the badge swipe, then turned off later. That meant the person who entered wanted the wing sealed, and they knew exactly where the panel was. They checked cameras outside the threshold because those still worked, and one angle finally gave a face. The figure wore scrubs under a jacket and kept their head down, but the gait was distinct. A nurse manager recognized the walk and the shoes, and she said it matched a long-time supply runner. The hospital could not accuse anyone publicly, but the detective did not need public accusations. A week later, the detective returned with a warrant and took a specific employee into custody off-site. The public statement said an internal theft ring was under investigation, and details were limited. Maris sent a short email to staff saying the East Wing was sealed permanently pending safety upgrades. No one wrote the words "secret trap" in that email, but everybody understood the message anyway. Larkin finished replacing the monitors in a different unit, and he refused any job that required the East Wing. He kept the tester recording backed up at home because he did not trust systems that went dark. Sometimes he still thought about that chirp from the overhead speaker, small and polite and wrong. It sounded like a warning or a signal, and he believed it had saved him by making him move. Months later, after the panel was removed and the bypass was filled, Terrence finally told Larkin one more thing. He said the wing was built to protect the rest of the hospital, and it did when used right. He said the danger came when someone decided protection could also be a cage. Larkin nodded and looked at the plain wall where the double doors used to be and felt quiet relief. The stories. This photo wasn't meant for you. The photo showed a man standing in a motel hallway holding a keycard like he was waiting for someone. Dispatch logs later showed the motel never called for help that night, even though someone clearly should have. In late October of 2016, Lyle Harkness was 34 and worked as a contract insurance adjuster. He spent most weeks on the road, taking storm claims and documenting damage with a tidy little camera. That Monday, he drove into a worn coastal town in the Pacific Northwest, chasing a stack of roof inspections. He wanted a shower, a hot meal, and 8 hours of sleep before a long day of ladders. The Bayshore Motor Lodge was cheap, quiet, and close to the highway, so he took it. The clerk handed him a key card and a receipt, then pointed toward the stairs without much eye contact. Lyle carried his bag up one flight and found his room near the ice machine at the far end. He noticed a security camera in the corner, but it looked old and a little crooked. Inside, the room smelled like bleach and lemon cleaner, which felt oddly reassuring for the price. He tossed his bag onto the bed and checked his phone, hoping for messages from the field office. Instead of a text, an image loaded on his screen, like someone had sent it through a group thread. It was a photo, grainy and slightly tilted, showing a motel hallway under buzzing lights. A man stood near a door, facing the camera, holding a keycard between two fingers. The timestamp in the corner read 11:52, which made no sense because it was only 9. The message line above the photo was blank, and there was no sender name at all. Lyle stared, then checked his signal and refreshed his inbox, thinking it was a glitch. The photo stayed, and his phone showed it came in as a multimedia message. He tried to open details, but the sender field looked like a string of zeros. He felt that prickle of annoyance, the kind he got from spam calls and fake bank alerts. He deleted the message, then set the phone down and turned on the bathroom light. 2 minutes later, the same photo arrived again, and his phone chimed like it was proud of itself. This time, the message line had 4 words, and they made his stomach tighten fast. It said, "This photo wasn't meant for you." Lyle glanced at the door, then at the hallway through the peephole, but nothing moved outside. He called the front desk, trying to keep his voice calm and normal. A tired woman answered and asked for his room number, like she was reading a script. He asked if they had a group text system or guest messaging, and she said no. He told her someone sent him a hallway photo that looked like the motel, and she went quiet. After a pause, she said, "Probably a wrong number. Just ignore it." Then ended the call quickly. Lyle did not like how fast she shut it down, so he saved the photo to his camera roll. He zoomed in on the door number behind the man, and the pixels fought him the whole way. Still, he could make out the shape of the numbers, and it looked like 128. His room was 115, and 128 would be down the hall and around the corner. He checked the timestamp again, then looked at the clock on the nightstand to ground himself. He went back to the peephole and watched for a full minute, breathing slow and steady. The corridor was empty, but the light flicker made it feel like a bad video loop. He told himself it was a wrong number, then tried to focus on something normal. He opened his laptop, pulled up his claim notes, and started writing a plan for the morning. That helped, until his phone vibrated again on the bedspread like a trapped insect. The new message was not a photo. It was a short audio file with no title. Lyle hesitated, then pressed play with the volume low, keeping one eye on the door. A man's voice came through, whispering fast, like he was hiding in a closet. Door 128. Now, the voice said. Bring the card, do not knock. Then there was a click, and the file ended like someone had yanked the battery out. Lyle sat very still, letting the silence settle, trying to decide if this was a prank. He thought about calling the police, then pictured the dispatcher asking what crime happened. He had a weird photo and a creepy whisper, which sounded thin even to his own ears. Still, his job trained him to document first, then act with a clear record. He saved the audio, took screenshots of the message thread, and wrote the time in his notes. A knock hit his door, sharp and short, and it made his skin jump. He moved to the peephole again, his heart thumping hard against his ribs. A man stood in the hall, not the same man from the photo, but close in build. This one wore a faded hoodie and held his hand near the lock, like he expected it to open. He leaned in and said, "You got the picture, right?" In a low, impatient voice. Lyle did not answer, and he did not move the chain, and he kept breathing through his nose. The man tried the handle once, then stepped back and stared at the door like it betrayed him. He lifted his phone, typed something, and waited, as if he expected a reply from the walls. After 10 seconds, he walked away toward the stairs, moving fast but not running. Lyle listened until the footsteps faded, then called the front desk again with shaking fingers. This time, a different clerk answered, a man with a flat voice that sounded half asleep. Lyle said someone just tried his door and asked if there was security on site. The clerk asked if anything was stolen, and when Lyle said no, the clerk sounded bored. He told Lyle to lock the deadbolt and call in the morning if it happened again. Then he added, sometimes locals mess around, and ended the call without taking a name. Lyle decided he was not staying another night, but he also did not want to walk outside alone. He put on his jacket, kept his phone recording audio in his pocket, and stepped into the hall. The corridor smelled like damp carpet and stale smoke, and the buzzing light felt louder now. He walked toward the stairs, passing door 128, and he slowed without meaning to. The door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to show a dark slice inside. Lyle stopped, listening, and he heard a faint shuffling sound, like someone moving a chair. He looked for a do not disturb sign, but there was none, and the hallway stayed empty. He did not want to be a hero, but he also could not shake the whisper from the audio. He pushed the door gently with 2 fingers, and it swung inward with a soft creak. The room was dark, but the bathroom light was on, casting a pale rectangle onto the carpet. A man lay on the floor near the bed, face down, one arm bent under his chest. There was no blood, no obvious wounds, just a stillness that looked wrong in the cheap light. Lyle's throat tightened, and he stepped back into the hall as if the room was radioactive. He called 911, and his voice cracked when he gave the motel name and room number. He stayed outside the open doorway, watching, waiting for the sound of breathing that never came. Police arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance that did not use sirens in the last block. Officers moved Lyle away and asked him to repeat what happened, and he did it carefully. He told them about the photo, the text, the whisper audio, and the man who tried his door. A detective asked to see the messages, and Lyle handed over his phone with trembling hands. The detective's face changed slightly when he saw the photo, like he recognized the setting. The motel hallway was taped off, and guests were asked to stay in their rooms. Lyle sat in a plastic chair near the lobby, giving a written statement with a dull pencil. He watched the clerk avoid looking at him, and he noticed her hands shaking when she poured coffee. Around 1 in the morning, a detective named Maris Grieve asked Lyle to come outside to talk. She was blunt, but not cruel, and she asked why he saved the photo instead of deleting it. Lyle told her his work made him keep records, and he thought it might be a scam. Grieve nodded and asked if he recognized the man in the photo, and Lyle said no. She asked if Lyle had any enemies, any business disputes, any reason someone would target him. Lyle almost laughed, because his life was boring and mostly spreadsheets, receipts, and long drives. Grieve wrote something down, then said the man in room 128 was not a guest. The dead man's wallet had no cash and no cards, just a library card and a folded receipt. The receipt was from a print shop in town, dated 2 days earlier, and it listed photocopies. Grieve said the room was rented under a fake name, paid in cash, and checked in by a woman. That woman left before dark, according to a bartender across the street who saw her smoking outside. Grev kept saying reportedly and so far, like she was careful not to build a story too early. Lyle asked about the guy who tried his door, and Grieve said the motel cameras were broken. Lyle did not believe that. Not fully, because he saw the camera in the hallway corner. He asked if the camera had been checked, and Grave gave a tired half smile. She said the camera housing was real, but the line was cut inside the wall months earlier. Then she asked again about the messages, and Lyle felt the question underneath the question. Back in his room, escorted by an officer, Lyle copied the files to his laptop as a backup. He listened to the whisper audio again through headphones, trying to catch background sounds. Under the words, there was a tiny rhythm, like a washer thumping or a vending machine hum. He played it beside the open window, and the hum lined up with the ice machine outside. It meant the whisper came from this floor, close enough to hear that steady mechanical beat. He opened the photo in editing software and boosted contrast, careful not to change the original file. At the bottom edge, a reflection showed in the glossy paint of a door across the hall. It was faint, but it looked like a phone held up by someone standing low and close. The angle suggested the photo was taken from near the carpet, like someone crouched or hid. Lyle wrote that down, then stopped, realizing he was acting like a detective on no sleep. The next morning, Grieve met him in the lobby and asked for that backup copy. She said digital evidence could vanish, and she did not want to rely on one device. Lyle handed over a flash drive, and she thanked him without warmth, just professional focus. Then she asked a new question, and it landed heavy in the quiet lobby. She asked if Lyle knew what a war-driving rig was, and Lyle said he had heard of it. Greve explained it in plain language, like she had done it before with nervous civilians. Someone nearby had used a laptop or hotspot to spoof a phone number and push messages. It made the sender look like nothing, and it made the target look random. Lyle asked why they would target him, and Grieve said that part was still unclear. Then she slid a printed photo across the counter, and it was the same hallway shot. On the back of the print, someone had written 2 letters and a time, all in blocky ink. It read, LH 1150. And Grieve watched Lyle's face as he read it. Lyle felt his mouth go dry, because those were his initials, and the time was close to the photo. He told Grieve he had never been in that hallway at that time, and she believed him. What scared him was that someone else believed he would be, like they had planned it. Grave asked about his work schedule, and Lyle told her his last inspection ended at 5. He stopped for dinner at a diner on the highway, paid with a card, and arrived at 8:30. Grieve said they would pull the diner footage, and she called it an external check. She also asked for his claim file because it showed his travel route and timestamps. Lyle agreed, because the alternative was feeling like a suspect in someone else's mess. Over the next 2 days, Grev kept him in the loop, which surprised him. The diner had footage that matched his story, and his card record backed the timeline. The print shop receipt from the dead man led to a clerk who remembered odd requests. The clerk said a woman asked for copies of security stills from a motel, paid cash, and rushed out. Grieve tracked the woman through a bus station camera, but her face stayed hidden under a cap. Then Grieve called Lyle with a detail that made the whole thing tilt sideways. The dead man was identified, not by family, but by a probation officer from another county. He had violated terms months earlier and had been missing from scheduled check-ins. In his file, there was a note about scams involving insurance adjusters after storms. The note said he and a partner used fake claims, then targeted adjusters who denied payouts. They pressured them, sometimes threatened them, and sometimes tried to steal laptops and cameras. Lyle felt cold hearing that, because his laptop held client data and claim documents. Grev said it was not proof, but it was a working theory that fit the pieces. The man who tried Lyle's door may have expected a different guest, one tied to that scam network. The messages were likely meant to lure someone to room 128, not to warn them away. The line, "This photo wasn't meant for you," started sounding less like a threat and more like panic. Greve asked Lyle to think back, and he finally remembered a small thing from check-in. The first clerk asked for his name, then repeated it softly like she was confirming something. She also looked at a paper list beside her keyboard, then slid the keycard over too fast. At the time, it seemed like bad customer service, but now it sounded like nerves. Lyle told Grieve, and Grieve asked him to describe the list. down to the color of the paper. That night, Grieve returned to the motel with a warrant for the office back room. She later told Lyle they found a clipboard with handwritten room assignments and guest names. Some names had circles, some had arrows, and one room number was scratched out hard. Room 115 had been written first, then crossed out, then rewritten beside Lyle's name. The room that should have been his, according to the original assignment, was 128. Greve said the motel manager admitted to taking cash from locals to leave certain rooms open. The manager claimed it was for drug deals, but Grave did not buy the whole story. The manager also admitted someone demanded access to the guest list that afternoon. The demand came with a threat, and the manager panicked and tried to swap a room quietly. It was a clumsy attempt to protect a guest, and it almost made the wrong guest die. The twist hit Lyle in a slow wave, like his brain needed time to accept it. The photo was not meant for him because he was not meant to be in that room. Someone expected an adjuster named Lyle Harkness to be in 128 at 11:50. Someone else, maybe the clerk, tried to reroute him to 115 without admitting why. The person sending the photo realized the swap too late, and the warning was all they could do. Greb said the man in the hoodie was likely the partner, arriving to finish a theft or a threat. He tried Lyle's door because he believed Lyle still had the original room. When Lyle did not answer, the partner went to 128 and found a problem already happened. Grave did not say exactly what evidence supported that, but she mentioned shoe prints and a glove. She also mentioned a dropped burner phone found near the stairs, still warm when police arrived. A week later, Lyle drove home with a new habit of checking locks twice. He kept replaying the moment he saw the photo and how close the plan came to working. He did not know if the clerk saved him on purpose or if she was just scared and guessing. Grieve later told him the clerk quit and left town, and nobody could find her easily. The case did not end with a clean confession, just a string of charges that fit the evidence. Lyle returned to his normal work, but he stopped staying at places that felt too cheap. He also started printing his own records because he learned how fast digital proof can get messy. Sometimes he opened the saved image and looked at the man holding the keycard in the hall. The man's face was tired and blank, like he already knew how the night would go. Lyle never learned who took the photo, but he understood the message better with time. It was not a spooky warning from nowhere, and it was not some curse tied to a motel. It was a human mistake, a rushed fix, and a plan that did not care who got hurt. The photo was meant to land on one person's screen at one time to pull them into a room. It landed on the wrong screen, and the wrong person lived because of that simple error. In the end, the scariest part was how ordinary the whole setup looked in bad lighting. The stories. The unsettling truth about this church basement. The first dispatch note called it a welfare check, but the basement door was bolted from the outside. By dawn, the church had taped off its own hallway, and nobody could agree on what they heard. In a river town in the upper Midwest, the old brick church sat one block from the courthouse. It was the kind of place that hosted potlucks, weddings, and quiet funerals all year. On a humid Tuesday in late summer, a man named Teague Ralston showed up early. Teague was 36, and he worked as a municipal building inspector for the county. He planned to finish one routine inspection, then grab coffee before his afternoon meetings. The church had applied for a permit to replace a stair rail near the basement steps. Teague had signed off on similar work dozens of times, and he expected nothing unusual. The pastor met him at the side entrance, smiling like this was an easy win. Her name was Maris Bellamy, and she looked tired under her neat hair. She apologized for the smell of paint, then said the contractor was running late. Teague asked for the basement access, since that was where the steps started. Maris led him down a narrow hallway, past a bulletin board and a locked office door. At the end, a heavy metal door sat under a faded exit sign. Maris reached for her keyring, then stopped and frowned at the latch. The padlock was already on, and it was snapped shut. Maris said, "That's not ours. We don't lock it like that." Teague leaned close and saw a fresh scratch in the metal near the staple. It looked like someone had forced the lock into place with a tool. He asked who had a key, and Maris shook her head too quickly. Teague didn't like surprises, especially around fire egress and public spaces. He told Maris he needed the lock removed, and he would note it in his report. Maris tried to laugh, then said, "Maybe the contractor did it for safety." Teague asked for the contractor's name, and she gave a company he recognized. He called the number from his phone, and it went to a generic voicemail prompt. A muffled thump came from the other side of the door. It wasn't loud, but it had weight, like a knee hitting a wall. Maris went still, then whispered, "Did you hear that?" Teague put his ear near the seam, and he heard a faint dragging sound. It lasted only a second, then there was silence again. Teague stepped back and asked if anyone was down there. Maris said the basement was empty, and her voice sounded practiced. Teague tried the handle anyway, and it didn't budge. He told Maris he was calling it in because a locked basement wasn't normal. Maris lifted her hands, then said, "Please, don't make a scene." Teague called the non-emergency line for the police department. He kept his voice calm, and he described the lock and the noise. The dispatcher asked if he saw smoke or immediate danger, and he said no. Then the dispatcher asked if anyone was missing, and Teague hesitated. Maris answered that nobody was missing, but she sounded irritated. The dispatcher said an officer would come by when available. Teague didn't love that, so he tried the door again, harder this time. The metal rattled, and the padlock held. Another thump came from inside, followed by what sounded like a quick breath. Teague looked at Maris, and she stared at the floor tiles. He told her he was going to step outside and find a tool. Maris said, "You can't break church property." Teague said, "Someone might be trapped. I'm not waiting." He walked out to his truck, grabbed a small bolt cutter, and headed back inside. He carried it like it was just another piece of work gear. Maris followed him, and her shoes squeaked on the tile. She said the church had an old fallout shelter room down there. Nothing more. Teague asked why a fallout room would need a fresh padlock. Maris said, "It's complicated. We just need time." Teague didn't answer because his focus had narrowed to the lock. He knelt, set the cutter jaws, and squeezed. The lock resisted, then snapped with a sharp crack. The door swung inward an inch, as if pressure had been holding it closed. A breath of air spilled out, sour and damp, like wet cardboard and old bleach. Teague pulled the door open and stepped into the stairwell. The light switch didn't work, so he used his phone flashlight. The steps were steep, and the handrail was new, still sticky with paint. Halfway down, he saw scuff marks on the wall, like heels had kicked during a struggle. At the bottom, the basement opened into a wide room with folding tables stacked neatly. Teague called out again, and his voice echoed off concrete. A soft whimper answered from behind a partition wall near the furnace room. He moved slowly, keeping his light low, and he saw a figure crouched by a pipe. It was a young man, late teens maybe, with wrists red and raw. Duct tape lay on the floor beside him, torn and dirty. The young man flinched when the light hit his face. He raised his hands and said, "Don't close it. Please don't close it." Teague said, "It's open. You're okay. What's your name?" The young man swallowed and said, "Kellen. Kellen Drex." His voice was hoarse, like he had been shouting for hours. Teague asked if anyone else was down there. Kellen shook his head, then pointed toward a storage closet. He said, "They moved the stuff," they said, "to keep quiet." Teague asked who, and Kellen's eyes darted upward toward the stairs. He said, "Church people. Not all, just some." Teague told him he was calling police again, and he did it immediately. This time he said there was a restrained person in the basement. The dispatcher's tone changed, and she said officers were on the way. Teague stayed between Kellen and the stairs, watching the doorway like it might bite. Maris appeared at the top step, framed by the hallway light. She looked down and froze when she saw Kellen. Her face went pale, then her jaw tightened like she was forcing herself to breathe. She started down one step, then stopped, gripping the rail. Teague said, "Don't come closer, just wait upstairs." Maris said, "Kellen, what are you doing here?" Kellen didn't answer, and his shoulders shook with contained sobs. Teague watched Maris's hands, because they were trembling. She said, "This isn't what it looks like." Teague said, "It looks like someone locked him in." Maris backed up without another word. Teague heard her shoes retreat, then a door slam somewhere above. For a moment, the basement felt even colder, despite the humid air. Kellen whispered, "She's not the worst one." Teague asked who was, and Kellen stared at the concrete. 2 officers arrived within minutes, according to later timestamps in the logs. They came down cautiously, hands near their belts, lights sweeping the corners. Teague explained what happened, and Kellen repeated his name and age. He said he was 19, and he had come to talk to someone at the church. He claimed he had been in a counseling session, then told to wait downstairs. Kellen said he asked to leave, and someone blocked the stairs. He said there were voices, then tape, then the click of a lock. He couldn't name everyone, but he described one man with a heavy ring. He remembered the ring because it scratched his cheek when tape was pressed down. He also remembered a sweet chemical smell, like a cleaner or solvent. The officers took Kellen upstairs and sat him on a chair in the fellowship hall. They asked Teague to stay. Since he was a witness and the one who cut the lock, Teague sat at a table with a paper cup of water, hands still buzzing. A third officer walked through the building, checking rooms and doors. The basement door was now open, and a strip of tape marked it as a scene. Maris finally returned, with another person close behind her. It was a man in a suit jacket, older, broad-shouldered, and polished-looking. He introduced himself as the church administrator, Hollis Quaid. He asked why police were in his building, and his tone was offended. One officer said there was a report of unlawful restraint, and Hollis smiled tightly. Hollis said, "This is a misunderstanding. The young man is unstable." Kellen looked up at that, and his mouth opened in disbelief. He said, "I asked to leave? You told them to lock it." Hollis raised a hand and said, "Son, you were a danger to yourself." Kellen shook his head, and tears rolled down his cheeks. Teague watched Hollis, and he noticed something small. On Hollis's right hand, a thick ring glinted under the hall lights. It was silver, with a dark stone that looked almost black. Teague remembered Kellen's detail, and his stomach tightened again. He told the officer quietly about the ring description and the scratch detail. The officers asked Hollis to step aside, and they requested keys and records. Hollis said the church kept counseling notes confidential, protected by policy. The officer said policy wasn't the same as law, and he asked again. Maris stood behind Hollis, eyes on the floor, hands clasped so hard her knuckles whitened. The air in the room felt thin, like everyone was holding their breath at once. Kellen asked for his phone, and he said it was taken from him. He said his backpack was in the basement storage closet. An officer went down with Teague and retrieved it, carefully, like evidence. Inside the backpack was a notebook with scribbled dates and names. There was also a small digital voice recorder, the kind used for lectures. Kellen said he carried it because he forgot things when he got anxious. He said he recorded meetings sometimes so he could replay them later. The officers exchanged a look, and one of them asked if he recorded today. Kellen nodded and said, "I think it's still running." Teague felt a cold flush, because that meant everything might be on tape. The recorder was still on, and its red light blinked weakly. The officer stopped it, bagged it, and noted the time. They didn't play it there, but later reports referenced a partial audio file. It reportedly captured voices arguing about liability, reputation, and keeping things contained. It also reportedly captured a sentence about the lock, spoken like an instruction. Teague didn't hear the audio himself, not that day. What he saw was the way Hollis's confidence cracked when the recorder appeared. His smile faded, and his eyes went sharp, like a cornered animal. He asked who was allowed to record, and an officer told him to stay quiet. Maris's face looked like it might fold in half, and she pressed a palm to her mouth. Kellen also had photos on his phone, which officers later recovered from the basement. He had snapped pictures of a hallway bulletin board before the session started. The photos showed a calendar with handwritten blocks and initials beside time slots. There were also sticky notes with room numbers, and one said basement. Another said lock check, with a date written for that morning. Teague asked how Kellen took photos if his phone was taken. Kellen said he took them earlier when nobody was watching, then hid the phone briefly. He said someone found it later, after he asked to leave. That detail sounded messy, but it also sounded like the truth. The photos had timestamps that fit the sequence, according to the officer's comment. By late afternoon, investigators from the county arrived. They took statements, photographed the lock, and measured the scuff marks on the wall. They also photographed the new handrail and the paint that smeared near the scratches. A technician swabbed the tape scraps for residue and fingerprints. Teague watched from the side, trying to make his breathing slow and steady. Kellen was taken to a clinic for evaluation, mostly for dehydration and stress. A nurse later noted bruising consistent with restraint, according to a summary Teague heard. The clinic also documented abrasions on his wrists and cheek. None of it proved motive, but it supported Kellen's story. Teague sat in his truck afterward, hands on the wheel, not turning the key. He went back to his office and filed his inspection report anyway. He noted the padlocked egress door, the broken lock, and the potential hazard. He attached photos he took after police arrived, keeping them factual and clean. He also wrote a separate memo for his supervisor, because this felt bigger. His supervisor told him to forward everything to the county attorney's office. Over the next week, rumors spread through town faster than any official update. People argued at diners, in parking lots, and on church steps after Sunday service. Some said Kellen was trespassing. Others said the church was hiding something. Teague tried to keep his head down, but he kept getting calls. A local reporter left voicemails asking for comment, and he never answered. Then, a new detail surfaced, and it shifted the whole story. A retired maintenance worker came forward after seeing the news segment. He said the basement door had been altered years earlier. He said the church once had a crash bar on the inside, but it was removed. He said he complained, and he was told it was temporary during renovations. The maintenance worker provided an old photo, taken during a volunteer workday. It showed the same door, but with the crash bar still installed. In the background, a whiteboard listed tasks, and one line said, "Remove bar." The date on the whiteboard was written in thick marker, 2012. Teague stared at the photo in disbelief, because it matched what he saw now. That meant the basement exit had been made easier to trap from the outside. Teague realized the padlock was not an accident or a one-time panic. It looked more like a system, slowly built to be invisible. A door that should always open had been turned into a cage. The unsettling truth wasn't only what happened to Kellen, it was how ready the building was. Investigators requested records related to renovations and safety inspections. They also subpoenaed emails from the church's administrative accounts. According to later summaries, certain messages referenced discretion and risk management. There were also references to a room used for difficult conversations. Nobody wrote the word basement as a confession, but the hints lined up. Teague was asked to come in for a follow-up interview. He described the lock, the noises, Maris's reaction, and Hollis's ring. He also mentioned the smell of cleaner, since Kellen remembered it too. An investigator told him they found a jug of industrial solvent downstairs. It was used for stripping floors, but it also made tape stick better for a while. Weeks later, the county released a statement that charges were being considered. They didn't name suspects in public, but they confirmed a continuing inquiry. The church suspended counseling sessions and closed the basement to the public. Hollis resigned, citing health reasons, and Maris took a leave of absence. None of that felt like closure. It felt like a curtain drawn quickly. Teague kept thinking about the moment the lock snapped. He had expected an empty room and a minor code violation. Instead, he found a person waiting in the dark, trying not to panic. He wondered how many others had sat down there and stayed quiet. He wondered how many people believed it was for their own good. Kellen eventually moved away, according to a neighbor who spoke to Teague later. He didn't want to be known as the basement kid for the rest of his life. Teague respected that, and he never tried to contact him again. He kept his role small, just a witness who did his job. Still, the sound of that thump behind the door stayed with him. On certain mornings, Teague drove past the church on his way to inspections. The building looked the same from the street, steady and respectable. Sunlight hit the stained glass, and cars lined the curb for community events. But Teague knew what could be hidden behind a quiet hallway. He learned that safety wasn't only codes and rails, it was who held the keys. The stories. This motel room was a trap. The motel room was booked under a fake name, paid in cash, and cleaned like nobody had ever slept there. The only thing left behind was a keycard that did not match the door. On a Tuesday in late summer of 2013, Lyle Rourke drove 3 hours for a routine delivery run. He was 42, and he worked as a parts courier for a medical equipment distributor. His day was supposed to be simple because he only had 2 stops and 1 overnight. He planned to sleep at a roadside motel near the interstate, then finish the route at dawn. Lyle was not the kind of person who chased trouble, and his coworkers would say he avoided drama. He kept his receipts sorted, he drove the speed limit, and he liked quiet places with bright parking lots. He had a divorce in the rearview mirror and a new habit of staying sober on the road. That night, he wanted a shower, a microwave dinner, and 8 hours of sleep. The motel sat behind a truck stop, with a fading sign and a row of doors facing the lot. It was not fancy, but it looked maintained, and the lobby smelled like cleaner. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with a tired smile, and she asked for a card on file. Lyle handed over his company card, signed, and received a plastic key sleeve. The sleeve said Room 12, and the key card had a scribbled mark in black ink. Lyle parked close to his door because he carried a locked case in the back seat. The case held valve assemblies and sterile connectors, the kind that cost a lot and get stolen easily. He carried the case inside first, then returned for his duffel and a fast food bag. When he stepped back into the hallway, the air felt colder than it should have. The corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. Inside room 12, everything looked normal at first glance. The bed was made tight, the curtains were drawn, and the air conditioner hummed. A small television played a local news channel with the volume low. That was odd, because Lyle had not turned it on. He stood still and listened, and he heard a faint clicking sound behind the wall, like a relay switching. He checked the room quickly, because that was just how his brain worked. The bathroom was empty, the closet was empty, and the window latch was intact. He noticed the phone on the nightstand was unplugged, which made no sense for a motel. He also noticed the smoke detector had a newer cover plate than the one in the hallway. The screws looked clean, and the plastic was slightly different color. Lyle tried to ignore it because he was tired and he did not want to spiral. He ate half his dinner, took a shower, and set his alarm for 5:30. He placed the parts case under the table, then slid a chair in front of it. That was not a security system, but it made noise if somebody moved it. When he turned off the lights, the television was still on, and the remote was missing. At 10:47, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, "You picked the wrong room." Lyle sat up so fast his shoulder cramped. He stared at the screen and waited for a follow-up, but nothing came. He checked the curtains again, and he saw headlights sweep across the wall outside. A vehicle had pulled in, then shut off. Lyle did not call the front desk right away because he did not know what to say. He did not want to sound paranoid, and he did not want to start trouble for the clerk. He decided to leave in the morning and report it to his manager as a weird incident. He rolled onto his side and tried to sleep, but his mind kept grabbing details. The unplugged phone, the missing remote, the clean screws on the detector. At 11:12, the clicking behind the wall returned, louder this time. It happened in short bursts, like someone flipping a switch on and off. Then his phone buzzed again with another text. It said, "Don't open the door." Lyle held his breath, and the hallway outside went quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no ice machine, just the air conditioner and his own pulse. He stayed in bed with his phone in his hand, and he watched the clock change 1 minute at a time. At 11:20, something brushed the outside of his door, like fabric or a sleeve. The handle did not move, but the metal plate clicked softly. Lyle looked at the deadbolt, then looked at the peephole, and decided not to use it. He had no reason to believe the peephole was safe, and his instincts were already screaming. Instead, he opened his camera app and held the phone near the peephole without looking through. He recorded for 10 seconds, then pulled it back and watched the video. The hallway was dim and grainy, but it showed a person standing close, facing the door. The person wore a hooded jacket and gloves, and their face was angled away. They were holding something flat against the door, like a card or a thin tool. Lyle's hands shook, but he kept thinking in small steps. He texted the unknown number back. "Who is this?" The reply came fast, like the other person was waiting. It said, "Just stay quiet and don't touch the latch." Lyle typed, "Call the police." The reply was, "They won't make it in time. Listen to the clicks." As if on cue, the clicking behind the wall started again. This time, it was paired with a faint whirring sound, like a motor trying to start. Lyle sat up and put his ear against the wall near the nightstand. He could hear the relay click, then a low vibration, then stop. It sounded like something was drawing power, then failing. He remembered the smoke detector, and he stood up slowly. He kept his shoes on, and he kept the phone in his hand. He aimed the flashlight up at the detector cover plate, and he saw a tiny seam along the edge. The seam looked fresh, like it had been opened and closed. He stepped onto the chair and took one screw out, then another, moving carefully. The cover plate came down, and he saw a small camera module inside the detector housing. It was pointed toward the bed, and it had a thin wire running into the ceiling. Lyle felt sick, and he climbed down without touching anything else. He took a photo, then backed away like the device could bite him. The clicks started again, and he realized someone might be watching his movement live. He did not want to panic, but he also did not want to be trapped in a room built for that. He went to the bathroom and checked the vent cover, and he found it had been replaced too. The screws were newer, and there was a faint smear of adhesive on the edge. He touched nothing, but he took more photos with his phone. Then he heard a soft tap on the door, followed by a whisper he could not understand. Lyle typed another text to the unknown number. "Are you in the hallway?" The reply was, "No, but they are." He typed, "Who are they?" The reply was, "Wrong people, wrong day." Then the phone buzzed with a final line. It said, "When the clicks stop, move." Lyle realized the unknown number might be a staff member, or a guest, or even part of the trap. He did not know, but the warning matched what he was hearing. The clicks were tied to whatever was hidden in the wall, and whoever was outside might be trying to trigger something. He looked around the room for another exit, and there was only the window. The window faced the parking lot, but the curtains hid the view. Lyle pulled the curtain edge just enough to see outside, and he froze. A dark sedan was parked 2 spaces away with no front plate visible. The driver's seat was occupied, and the person inside was watching his door. In the glow of the lot light, Lyle saw a second person crouched near the door frame, working with a tool. Lyle stepped back from the window and tried to breathe. He considered calling 911, but his phone had one bar, and the call might fail. He also worried the room was wired for audio, and speaking could give them information. He chose the one thing that did not require talking. He started a voice memo without speaking, and he put the phone in his pocket. If something happened, at least the timestamp would exist. Then the click stopped, and the air conditioner cut out. The room went quiet in a sudden, unnatural way. Lyle felt the hair rise on his arms, because it sounded like the power had been interrupted. He heard the outside door handle jiggle once, then stop. He moved fast, because the warning said to move when it stopped. He grabbed his parts case and his duffel in one trip, and he went straight to the bathroom window. The bathroom had a smaller window, but it was closer to the side of the building and less visible. He pushed the window up and felt it stick, like fresh paint or tape on the track. He shoved again, harder, and it opened with a ripping sound. His heart slammed, because that noise would carry. He climbed out feet first, scraping his shin on the sill. The ground was gravel and damp grass, and it smelled like fuel from the truck stop. He crouched low and moved along the wall toward the corner. He heard voices now, still muffled, but close. Someone outside his door said, "He's still inside." Another voice replied, "Get the latch." Lyle kept moving, and he rounded the corner into deeper shadow. He ran behind a row of dumpsters, then into the bright truck stop lot. He did not look back, because he did not want to give himself away. He walked fast, then faster, and went inside the truck stop where people were awake. He headed to the cashier and said, "Call the police. Somebody is breaking into my room." When officers arrived, they did not treat it like a normal noise complaint. They spoke to Lyle in the truck stop booth area, and he showed them the photos. The camera in the smoke detector changed the mood immediately. The officers drove to the motel and found the door to room 12 slightly open with the latch plate scratched. The room lights were on, and the television was off now, as if someone had muted a scene. The sedan was gone, and so was the person Lyle had recorded at the peephole. The clerk insisted no one else had access to that room, and she denied any hidden devices. She also looked genuinely shocked when shown the photos, which did not prove innocence, but it did not look like an act. An officer called for a unit with technical training, and they asked the motel manager to unlock the electrical closet. Behind the wall, near room 12, they found a junction box with fresh tape and a spliced line. The splice fed power into a small control module mounted behind a loose panel. The module had a timer relay, the same kind used to cycle electricity on a schedule. It could cut the air conditioner, cut the lights, and send power to the ceiling wire. It was not a high-tech weapon, but it was enough to unsettle someone and control the room. The investigation stretched into weeks, and most of it played out in paperwork and interviews. Officers collected Lyle's phone video, his photos, and the voice memo timestamp. They obtained motel keycard logs and learned something simple but important. The key sleeve handed to Lyle was marked Room 12, but the keycard itself had been encoded for Room 16. The scribbled black ink mark was a quick cover, meant to hide the mismatch. That meant Lyle was never supposed to be in Room 12, at least not according to the card. Somebody at the desk either made an error or someone swapped sleeves on purpose. The clerk swore she did not swap anything, and her shift had a gap where she left to restock towels. Cameras in the lobby were broken that week, and the manager admitted it casually. That detail made investigators look harder, because broken cameras are common excuses. A detective tracked down the unknown number that texted Lyle, and it led to a prepaid phone that could not be tied easily. Still, the detective pulled tower data and saw the prepaid phone was near the motel during the incident. It stayed close for 20 minutes, then moved east on the interstate. The device also pinged near a hardware store 2 towns over the next day, the same store that sold the relay module found in the wall. The twist arrived when the detective compared another report from 2 months earlier. A different motel in the same region had a similar complaint. A guest reported clicking sounds and strange texts. That guest left before police arrived, but they reported a hidden camera in a vent. The room number in that earlier report was also 12. It was not proof of a pattern, but it was a striking repeat. Investigators started looking at who requested room 12 and who paid cash. They found a run of cash bookings under fake names, always requesting end rooms and always leaving fast. The employees remembered the same detail: a dark sedan, no plate on the front, driver wearing a cap. No one had a clear face, but the pattern suggested the trap was for a specific kind of target. Lyle's company helped without meaning to, because they provided delivery manifests. One of Lyle's stops was a small clinic that had recently reported missing equipment. The missing items were similar to what criminals use to access controlled supplies. The detective thought someone might have assumed Lyle carried higher value cargo. If a crew was targeting couriers, a motel room with a hidden camera could help them learn routines, codes, and storage habits. That theory fit the trap idea better than anything else. The room was wired to watch, the relay clicked as someone tested the system, and the person at the door used a tool to bypass the latch. The texts read like instructions from someone who knew the trap but wanted Lyle to survive it. That could have been a nervous accomplice, or a different guest who had been burned before. No one ever proved who sent the warnings, and that haunted the case file. The detective wrote it carefully, because guessing would be easy and useless. The official notes said the sender was unknown, possibly nearby, possibly involved, possibly a bystander. What mattered was that the warnings were accurate, and they likely kept Lyle alive. Lyle quit the courier job within a month, and he took a warehouse role closer to home. He told people he was tired of highways and cheap motels, and that was true enough. Privately, he kept thinking about the keycard and how close a simple error came to saving him. If the card had matched the sleeve, he might have walked into room 16, and the trap might have stayed quiet. Instead, he landed in room 12 by mistake, and that mistake forced the trap to show itself. The clicks, the texts, the hidden camera, and the scratched latch were all pieces of a plan that did not account for a cautious person. Years later, the motel changed owners, and the sign was replaced with a brighter one. Room numbers were repainted, and the hallway lights stopped flickering. But the strange part is how small the difference was. Just one keycard, just one room number. The trap was built to feel normal until it was too late. And, for one night in 2013, it almost worked exactly as designed. The stories. These archived dispatch calls revealed proof. The audio sat in a plain folder, stamped with a date and a case number that never went anywhere. Years later, those archived dispatch calls finally showed what actually happened that night. Blaine Hargrove was 42, and he produced local radio stories for a small station in the Desert West. On a Monday morning in early spring, he drove to the county building to request old emergency recordings. He had a simple goal for the day. He wanted sound for a cautious piece about misfiled crash reports. The station had heard whispers for years. One incident near a highway turnout kept returning in complaints. The rumor was always the same: a late-night call, a single vehicle, then a sudden silence. Some locals said a teenager vanished. Others said the report was padded to hide a police mistake. Blaine never repeated those claims on air. He only said the file had gaps and missing pages. Dispatch archives were supposed to be routine, so he expected a quick copy and a polite goodbye. At the counter, a clerk named Lark Soria slid a form under the glass and kept her voice low. She looked about 30, and she worked records intake for public requests and internal routing. She told Blaine the recordings existed, but the index notes were strange and partly overwritten. Blaine asked what that meant, and she shrugged, like she did not want the answer either. Lark led him to a side desk with an old computer and a small speaker that crackled at low volume. She said the county had migrated systems twice, and some files survived only as stitched fragments. Blaine thanked her, then put on headphones and began listening with a producer's careful patience. The first minutes sounded normal, a dispatcher logging traffic stops and a stalled truck call. Then the incident started, with a man's voice cutting in, tense, short, and trying to stay calm. He said he was at a turnout by the mile marker sign and something was wrong with a parked car. The dispatcher asked for details, and the caller said the driver was slumped and not responding. Blaine expected the next line: send units, start medical, confirm location. But the recording shifted. A second dispatcher voice appeared, sharper, and it used a call sign Blaine did not recognize. It ordered a unit to break off, then told another unit to hold traffic and wait for a supervisor. The first dispatcher tried to speak, but the audio clipped like someone keyed a mic too close. Blaine rewound and listened again, and the same odd command landed in the same exact second. He paused the audio and stared at the screen, because it sounded like two channels merged poorly. Lark watched him from behind the counter, and her face tightened when she saw his expression. Blaine asked if the second dispatcher was real or if the system had a known echo problem. Lark said there should have been only one dispatcher on nights, and the roster showed a single name. Blaine kept listening, and the caller's voice returned, quieter now, as if he had moved closer. He said the car door was open, and there was a phone on the seat with the screen still lit. The dispatcher told him to step back, and he agreed, but his breathing stayed loud in the mic. Then a new sound came through, a brief metallic click, followed by a calm voice saying, "Cancel units." The cancel order did not sound like a field officer. It sounded like a desk voice with a practiced rhythm. Blaine felt his skin go cold because cancellations were supposed to include a reason and a unit number. Instead, the voice simply said the call was unfounded and told everyone to return to prior assignments. The original dispatcher protested, and the recording ended with a sharp tone and a cut to dead air. Blaine removed the headphones and asked Lark if the logbook matched what he had just heard. She opened a scanned report on her screen, and it showed a routine welfare check with no transport. The notes said the vehicle belonged to an out-of-town contractor, and it drove off before contact. Blaine asked if any unit ever arrived, and Lark said the unit number was blank in the entry. He requested the original dispatch log, and Lark told him those paper logs were stored off-site in boxes. She offered to file another request, and Blaine agreed, keeping his voice steady and professional. As he signed the form, he noticed her hands were trembling, like she had heard this story too. Lark said she could not access everything, but she could tell him where the boxes were indexed. That afternoon, Blaine returned to his station office and transferred the audio into editing software. He did not change the file, he only made a working copy and marked the timestamps carefully. He listened in full, then compared it to the written entry line by line, looking for simple explanations. A bad merge could explain overlap, but it could not explain the new dispatcher voice using a missing call sign. Blaine called a retired dispatcher he knew, a man named Hollis Gant, who taught radio basics at a community college. Hollis was 61, and he had worked nights for 2 decades before taking early retirement. Blaine played a short excerpt, and Hollis immediately asked where the second voice came from. He said it sounded like a console mic, not a portable radio, because of the clean compression and lack of wind noise. Blaine asked about the click, and Hollis said it sounded like a channel patch being opened and closed. He explained that old systems let supervisors override traffic, especially during officer safety incidents. Blaine asked if overrides were logged, and Hollis said they should be, unless someone bypassed the normal menu. He also said the voice cadence felt familiar, like someone who had trained others and used set phrases. Blaine made a plan that was simple: gather every source that could confirm who spoke and who listened. He requested the off-site paper logs, the unit assignment roster, and the maintenance notes for the dispatch console. He also tracked down the original caller, using the case number tied to the partial record index. The contact address was outdated, but a utility record pointed to a forwarding box in a coastal town. A week later, Blaine reached the caller by phone, and the man sounded older than expected. His name was Keir Lamb. He was 50, and he worked as a forklift mechanic for a shipping yard. Keir said he had avoided interviews for years because he felt stupid and scared about that night. He agreed to talk off the record first, as long as Blaine did not use his name on air. Keir said he had been driving home late, and he pulled into the turnout to make a quick call. He noticed a sedan with its driver door open and a person inside who did not respond. He called emergency services from a flip phone, and he remembered the dispatcher voice clearly. He also remembered someone else talking over her, like a second person in the same room. Keir said he heard the cancel order, and it did not come through the phone speaker. He said it came from behind him, like someone standing near the turnout speaking into a handheld radio. Blaine asked if Keir saw anyone, and Keir said he saw a dark SUV with no light bar. It rolled in slow, stopped without headlights, and someone stepped out and told him to leave. Keir said the person was not in uniform, but he held a radio and spoke like he belonged there. He told Keir, "Go home. You didn't see anything, and you don't want trouble." Keir left because he believed him, and because his phone screen had gone dark as if the call dropped. He drove straight home, and he did not sleep, because he kept imagining the open car door in the wind. Blaine asked why Keir never filed a complaint, and Keir said he tried once, then got warned again. He said a man called his house the next day and knew details that were not in the public record. The man told him the county had it handled and said his job could get complicated if he kept talking. Keir said he had a kid at home then, and he chose silence, even though it still bothered him. Blaine compared Keir's memory to the audio again, and one detail stood out in a new way. The cancel voice sounded like it came through the dispatch system, but Keir remembered hearing it nearby. That meant someone on scene repeated the cancel order, or someone on scene caused it to happen. Blaine needed more than a feeling. He needed a solid chain from the console to the turnout. When the off-site boxes arrived, Lark called Blaine and told him to come in after lunch. She met him with a cart of binders and a warning. The pages smelled like smoke and old tape. Blaine thanked her, then began photographing entries with his phone, keeping the dates aligned. The log for that night included the initial call, but the next lines were torn out cleanly. The tier was too neat for age, like someone removed a strip on purpose and then filed the rest. Blaine asked Lark who handled archives back then, and she said a supervisor managed retention compliance. She gave Blaine a name that was public in old payroll records, a dispatch supervisor known for strict control. Blaine did not repeat the name in his notes. He wrote only supervisor and the year. Blaine requested the maintenance notes next, hoping they would show a console override or a repair ticket. The county replied with a short letter saying no relevant notes existed due to a purge policy. Blaine appealed the response and included dates and system model references from public purchasing records. 2 days later, a different clerk emailed a scan that had been missed, a single page with a service code. The page referenced a patch panel fault, and it listed a time within minutes of the turnout call. It also listed a technician sign-off, and the signature matched the supervisor's initials in the payroll files. Blaine showed the page to Hollis, and Hollis frowned and said that was not a technician's signature. He said it looked like a supervisor signing to close a ticket without an actual repair. Blaine now had 3 things that aligned: an overwritten index, torn log lines, and an odd console patch record. Still, none of it proved who issued the cancel order, and none of it proved why. He needed the one thing most people ignored, the background noise that rides under speech. So he took the working copy and asked an audio engineer at the station to run a clean analysis. The engineer, a woman named Tamsin Rowe, was 35 and had built her career restoring old interview tape. She listened with good headphones, then zoomed into the waveform around the metallic click. She said there was a second click under the first, offset by a fraction of a second. She explained it sounded like a desk foot switch, followed by a handheld transmit button. Tamsin also noticed something stranger, a low tone under the cancel voice that stayed constant. She said it sounded like an air conditioner fan, the kind found in small office rooms. Then, she compared it to the first dispatcher voice, and the fan tone was different and steadier. That suggested the cancel voice was recorded in a different room, then patched into the main channel. Blaine asked if that could happen, and Tamsin said yes, if someone used a training room console. Some centers had a second console for drills, and it could be patched into live traffic in emergencies. Blaine asked who had access, and Tamsin said supervisors and trainers usually had the keys. Blaine felt the story tightening because a trainer would know exactly how to sound calm on a bad night. He returned to the county building and asked Lark one careful question. Did the dispatch center have a training console then? Lark hesitated, then said the old floor plan showed a side room labeled instruction booth. She said it was removed during renovations, but it existed in that era and shared wiring with the main floor. Blaine asked if the booth had its own mic, and she said yes, and it had a direct patch switch. Blaine still did not have the motive, and he did not want to guess at it. So he looked at what else happened that night, and he found something buried in unrelated paperwork. A property sheet showed a large cash seizure from a traffic stop logged into the evidence room at midnight. The next morning, the cash was reported short, and the report blamed a counting error and got closed. Blaine lined up the times, and the turnout call landed right between the evidence log and the cash discrepancy report. He asked Hollis if a fake emergency could pull units off the road, and Hollis said it was a classic trick. A welfare check at a turnout would draw patrol, and it would also distract dispatch from monitoring internal doors. If someone needed 5 minutes alone, a sudden call and a sudden cancel could make that window. Blaine called Keir again and asked about the dark SUV, and Keir described it in more detail. He said it had a State Fleet plate and a small antenna cluster like a communications vehicle. He said the driver who spoke to him wore a plain jacket, but carried himself like a supervisor. Keir also said the sedan in the turnout was not in bad shape. It looked staged, like it had been parked carefully. Blaine realized the proof was not just in what the dispatch calls said, it was in what they avoided saying. No one ever confirmed a unit arrival, no one ever logged a plate check, and no one asked for medical priority. The call was designed to be started and stopped quickly, without the normal steps that create paper trails. That meant the person controlling it knew policy, and knew exactly which parts to skip. Blaine requested one more thing, the building entry logs for the dispatch center on that night. The county said those logs did not exist anymore, but a facilities contractor had kept backups for billing disputes. After more calls, Blaine obtained a scanned badge report that showed door activity after midnight. It showed the supervisor badge opening the training booth door, then the evidence room hallway door minutes later. Blaine sat with Tamsin and Hollis and listened to the key moments again, with the badge report in hand. They played the click, the cancel voice, and the sharp cut to dead air. Hollis said the cut sounded like a manual stop, not a system end, because the tail tone was missing. Tamsin said the handheld click matched a portable radio nearby, which fit Keir hearing a voice behind him. Blaine had to be careful, because proof can still be misunderstood if the story gets rushed. He wrote a timeline using only documents, audio artifacts, and witness statements that could be verified. He removed names, and he removed any detail that could point to private people who had done nothing wrong. He focused on the method, a staged call, a training booth patch, a rapid cancel, and a missing log strip. When Blaine returned to the county building to ask for comment, Lark met him with tired eyes. She said someone had called her office, asking why she kept helping a radio producer dig up old dirt. Blaine told her she did not need to do anything else, and he could handle the rest on his own. Lark shook her head and said she had one more thing, because she was done pretending it was normal. She handed him a photocopy of an internal memo, filed as a training note but written like a warning. It instructed staff to route certain audio requests to supervision, and it referenced the turnout call by date. The memo used the phrase proof risk, and it ordered that no copies be made outside official review. Lark said she found it in a misfiled binder, and it had never been scanned into the public index. Blaine read the memo twice, then folded it and placed it in a plain envelope with his notes. The proof was not a confession, but it was a paper trail showing someone feared what the audio contained. He thanked Lark, and she asked one question. "Are you going to put this out there?" Blaine said he would, but he would do it carefully and only with what he could support. The final piece came from a place Blaine did not expect, a voicemail from an old number he had called weeks earlier. It was short and strained, and it sounded like a person trying to choose words that would not invite retaliation. The voice said the training booth patch switch was used that night, and it was used by someone with keys. The voice also said the sedan at the turnout belonged to a county pool, and it was checked out under a fake entry. Blaine saved the voicemail, then asked Tamsin to confirm it was not spliced or altered. Tamsin said it was clean, and she noted the same steady fan tone found under the cancel voice. That meant the voicemail speaker had likely been in the same small room and knew the sound of it. Blaine did not know who left the message, but the audio carried its own quiet fingerprint. When the story aired, Blaine kept the language careful and grounded because facts matter more than heat. He played the dispatch excerpt, then explained the torn log, the badge report, and the patch record. He included Keir's account without naming him, and he described the SUV in broad terms only. He never claimed a specific person stole anything, but he showed how the staged call created a perfect distraction. The county responded with a short statement, saying the matter was old and could not be confirmed. They did not deny the training booth existed, and they did not explain why the log strip was missing. Within days, a state auditor announced a review of evidence handling practices going back many years. Blaine did not celebrate, because the point was never drama. It was the shape of truth in the record. Weeks later, Blaine sat in his edit room and listened to the archived call one last time. He noticed how the original dispatcher sounded, like someone trying to do her job inside a sudden fog. He imagined the moment she realized a second voice had taken control, and she could not stop it. It was not supernatural. It was ordinary power, used quietly, and that made it worse. Blaine filed the raw audio, the memo copy, and his notes into the station archive with strict access rules. He labeled everything with dates in words, so future staff would not lose the trail in bad metadata. He also sent Keir a short message through the number he had, saying the story was finally out. Keir replied once, and only with relief, saying he could breathe easier now. The proof had been there all along, hiding in a click, a fan hum, and a missing strip of paper. It did not solve every question about the turnout, but it showed the call was never what it claimed. For Blaine, that was enough to matter, because it meant the record could still be corrected. And for anyone who still trusted the archive, it was a reminder that silence sometimes has fingerprints.